Hi, I'm Jack Infinity 203, and welcome back to my series of Spider-Man reviews. This is episode 3, and I am here to talk to you guys about the concluding chapter of the Spider-Man Trilogy, known as Spider-Man 3. Beware, there will be spoilers ahead. No matter how big or small they are, there will be spoilers throughout this review. This movie has been out since 2007, so at this point, I am not going to hold back with what happened in this movie. So if you haven't seen Spider-Man 3 yet, do yourself a favor and get out of this video as quick as you can, because I will not hold back. You have been warned. Spider-Man 3 is about Peter Parker as he successfully manages a double life between Peter Parker and Spider-Man. However, he gets caught in a love triangle between his girlfriend, Mary Jane Watson, himself, and a girl he met in his class named Gwen Stacy. Making matters complicated, Harry Osborn becomes the new Goblin, and armed with his father's weapons, he uses it to get vengeance on Peter Parker for the death of his father at the end of the first Spider-Man movie. But making that even more complicated, Flint Marko, who breaks out of prison, tries to take care of his dying daughter, but ends up transforming into the Sandman and starts to wreak havoc across the city. But making matters even more complicated involves the Symbiote. It crash lands on Earth and bonds with Peter, and it unleashes all of the darkest and nastiest traits of Peter Parker. And then he meets Eddie Brock, who tries to compete for his role at the Daily Bugle. In the end, Peter Parker must try to free himself of the symbiote and save the city once more. To kick off with some highlights of this movie, I'm going to highlight the acting first. I think it's still good this time around. I think one of the standouts of this movie was Haden Church as Sandman. He easily gives the best performance out of each of the three villains in this movie, because he's a sympathetic character, because you feel that he just wants to help his daughter who's dying, and you could see just from his mannerisms to the way he acts, I think he easily holds the best villain aspect of Spider-Man 3. He's probably he's also one of the best parts about the movie as a whole, because I loved how he gives for some great moments, like when he becomes the Sandman for the first time. That was a really sad sequence, and he sold it. And the action sequences between him and Spider-Man are really cool. Like the one in the black suit Spider-Man versus Sandman in the subway was awesome. And so as Spider-Man fighting him on a truck as he's trying to steal the money. Overall, Sandman was easily a highlight of the movie. Tobey Maguire is still good in here like he was in the first two movies. I also liked how this time you see him perform a much more egotistical and much more darker Peter Parker when the symbiote bonds with him. And it really kind of shows you, like, he sold the performance of a much more bad boy Peter. And I really enjoyed that. Even if it comes off as cringeworthy, I did not mind it whatsoever. Kirsten Dunst still gives a good performance as Mary Jane in this movie, same as James Franco as Harry Osborn, now that he's the new Goblin in this movie. And Bryce Dallas Howard and Topher Grace were great as both Gwen Stacy and Eddie Brock. And J.K. Simmons continues to show you why he's absolutely perfect for J. Jonah Jameson. It's pretty much common knowledge at this point, but I cannot do a Spider-Man movie review without mentioning J. Jonah Jameson being played by J.K. Simmons. So, yeah. A positive of Spider-Man 3, without a doubt, is the action sequences. Just like in the first two movies, the action sequences still look really good in Spider-Man 3. And visually, this one right here between Symbiote, Spider-Man, and Sandman, it's awesome. It really looks cool to watch, and seeing Spider-Man really take down Sandman a little bit more brutally than his past villains, and it's enjoyable to watch for sure. Another positive of this movie is the web swinging scenes. They still hold up really well here, and it gives for some really awesome moments, like when Spider-Man is trying to swing as fast as he can to save Gwen Stacy as she's hanging off the side of a building, and it's absolutely thrilling and so engaging to watch, and it's such a heart-racing, adrenaline-pumping scene, and I just love how this scene looks, because it really shows you Spider-Man trying to work as fast as he can, and it's just awesome all around. Taking over for Danny Elfman this time around is Christopher Young. Because Danny Elfman was absent after the first two movies, he couldn't return for Spider-Man 3. They brought in Christopher Young, and he still gave a great variety of scores, and I absolutely love the score for when he first suits up in the black suit. It's just so awesome, and it fits the scene perfectly, and I do think he's given us, even the Sandman theme and the Venom theme, I think are great, and I definitely feel like he still was a worthy successor to do the score of this movie in spite of Danny Elfman's absence. So Christopher Young did a good job for this movie. Oh, and the climax of this movie is awesome. I just love seeing how Harry Osborn comes in, he saves Peter, and they team up to take on Venom and Sandman to save MJ from death. And it's just so inspirational seeing a friend and foe who used to be best friends become allies once again to fight the common threat. And it's just so fun to watch. And it's really cool finally seeing them fight side by side in the concluding chapter of the trilogy. I'm going to sidetrack just for a bit. This scene right here, it may be cringeworthy, but this is so flat out hysterical to me, how Peter Parker is just dancing in the sidewalk, and all these girls are looking at him like he's just a weirdo. And I just love how, as the symbiote is in control of him, of his personality, he ends up dancing like a weirdo in the middle of the street, and it's so hysterical, and it's so entertaining to watch. I don't even find it cringeworthy. To be honest, yeah, this scene is absolute cinema at its finest right here. One last positive I'll mention in this video for Spider-Man 3 review is the ending. I thought it had a strong ending to the trilogy, especially as this was the last one in the series, despite not getting a planned fourth one made. And I thought after Peter forgave Sandman for what happened, and then Sandman gets away, I loved how the whole, once that happens, Peter, he basically goes next to Harry as he dies, and Harry forgives him for everything that's happened in the trilogy after Norman's death. And I loved how these three friends, Peter, Harry, and MJ, they're all together, and they look at the sun as it rises, and it's a heartfelt moment, and it's a sad one, seeing that Harry is dead, and he sacrificed himself to save Peter after all that's happened in this movie, and it's a high note to end on. And then you cut to the jazz club scene where Peter comes in, and he and MJ have a dance, and then the camera just shows them dancing, and then it just cuts to black, and I thought that is a very good way, and it's a satisfying way to end out the Spider-Man trilogy. Before I get into the negatives, let's go with my one mixed aspect of this movie, and that is the visual effects. So it's a hit or miss in this movie at times, because it looks good for the web swinging scenes, but in the scenes like when the chase between Peter and New Goblin in the beginning, that looked really fake, not gonna lie. It really feels kind of wonky. It doesn't look that great, and at times it really doesn't hold up very well compared to some of the other stuff in the movie than it does for the fight between Sandman and Spider-Man in the subway. And the final battle, it's still cool to watch, but I think there are times where as they fight in the climax, you could kind of tell some of this is fake, because in the first two movies, a lot of the stuff was practical. They didn't rely too much on CGI, but this movie heavily relied on CGI, and it really shows with this movie. So while I loved the visual effects in the first movie and the second movie, it's a hit or miss for me this time. So it's not bad, but it's not that great either. So sadly, the VFX is kind of a mixed point for me in this movie. One of my biggest issues with this movie is Venom. Easily the weakest antagonist of the three. He was the one that feels the most forced into the movie, and it adds to the issue that this movie feels like two movies rolled into one, because originally they were going to try to make this a two-part movie, but they had to cram all of this into one movie, and it really makes the movie messy in a way, because you had Sandman, then you have the New Goblin, then you have Venom, and I think Venom, and he had kind of motivations that feel kind of strange based off of humiliation, but overall, I thought Venom was easily the weakest antagonist in the movie, and that was all because Sony interference is what led to him in this movie in the first place. The story, sadly, is not as strong in this movie as in the first two, because this time there's so much happening in this movie, because the first half of this movie feels like one movie, and then the second half feels like another, and it's just the fact that's all crammed into like a 2 hour, 17-minute movie is just kind of sad, because they have good ideas in this movie, but they're all just crammed in one, and they just feel kind of strange that they're all together, because you have different villains. Like, you had the new Goblin stuff, I thought was cool when we had it, but it was kind of a disappointment that it ended up kind of being wasted, because they were building up to this moment since the end of the first movie. And the fact that you had the first few minutes and you had new Goblin trying to kill Peter, and then he loses his memory all of a sudden, that was kind of a letdown, because then it just ruins the impact of the end of one and seeing Harry wanting revenge on Peter. And when he gets his memory back, there's a sequence which was also cool to watch, but then it just wraps up that part, and then you get his redemption. It feels just kind of rushed, and it just didn't really get the screen time it deserved. It should have been done more, but that's also due to the fact that then they had Venom in the movie, and Venom was easily, again, the weakest part of the villains, because Venom is basically put in this movie because they were like, oh, people want to see Venom, so they're going to give him Venom. And compared to like Sandman, New Goblin, Venom was kind of weak, because Venom could have easily been set up at the end of this movie and saved for a fourth movie, but they decided, let's bring him in this movie. And Sandman could have been another villain too, because again, I liked how he was a sympathetic character, and he was easily one of the best parts of the movie. So, and he had a lot going on, because then you had Peter, he's doing well with his life, and then you had the love triangle between MJ and Gwen Stacy, and then you had the new Goblin stuff, and then you had the Sandman stuff, and then you had the Symbiote stuff when Peter bonds with the Symbiote and unleashes his dark personality, and then you got Venom and the Eddie Brock stuff, and it's just, there's too much happening in this movie, and it easily should have been at least 3 hours long, or just split it in two parts. And I think if they did all that, then maybe it would have been a lot better than what we got story-wise. So easily the story falls short in comparison to the movies of 1 and 2. Overall, while Spider-Man 3 has a lot of good things right, and it's very entertaining, it has a lot of awesome set pieces, and a satisfying way to wrap up the trilogy, it's sadly, without a doubt, the weakest movie in the trilogy that had a lot of high highs, but it had some really low lows. And while that is the case, I do think Spider-Man 3 is a pretty entertaining movie, and it does do a good job wrapping up the trilogy with what they had to work with. And so, I'm going to give Spider-Man 3 a B. And you should still watch this movie to see how Spider-Man 3 wraps up the trilogy. So, those are my thoughts on Spider-Man 3. Not a bad movie, but definitely not amazing like the first two. So, I would love to hear your thoughts down below in the comments section. And after this, expect a review for The Amazing Spider-Man. I don't know if this will be up next, but I do know it will happen eventually, leading up to Spider-Man No Way Home. So look forward to that coming soon. And I hope you guys had a blast watching my review of Spider-Man 3. Thank you guys for sticking around. And don't forget to give this video a like. Let me know down below in the comments section. I would love to hear your thoughts on this movie. I would love to hear it down below. And don't forget to subscribe for more. And stick around for more reviews on Spider-Man leading up to the release of Spider-Man No Way Home.